You knock out the door and with my pigeons, you know it's it has to roll. And the fine and current story in my state to see. Just like a phonetic guitar, cause mine runs deep.
Have you ever had that feeling when you think something is wrong? I'm not talking about the kind of wrong that comes from work or family problems, drinking too much alcohol, sniffing glue, or using other mind-altering substances. I mean something is wrong in a social sense. The kind that suggests an injustice is happening. Have you ever thought about how to react when you feel that way? I ask because our reaction is the most important thing when that feeling arises. It shows how we deal with what's happening and whether we have control over our lives. When we suspect something is wrong, it is important to think logically. This process helps us determine exactly what is wrong and who is causing it. This way of thinking isn't about wondering about the issue. It's not a series of assumptions, speculations, or statements where speaking outpaces thinking. Thinking means applying all knowledge to the situation at hand. For example, suspecting that something is wrong is a starting point. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that something is actually wrong. When we suspect something is wrong, we must determine if our suspicion is valid or just an assumption. If we find evidence that something is indeed wrong, then we must figure out what it is and correct the irregularity. But the accumulated past that we call history shows something else. When someone feels something is wrong, they usually try to explain it right away. This is usually not a result of thinking process. When we give a quick answer without thinking or applying knowledge, the result is often a false explanation or conspiracy theory. Rather than offering a reasonable explanation and solution to the problem, the feeling that something is wrong only makes the problem seem worse. Instead of figuring out if something is really wrong, and if so, what it is, we often give a fake answer. We even more often make up a conspiracy. Conspiracies never go out of fashion. They are the result of a lack of knowledge and are therefore naturally stuck in the minds of most people who don't know enough, don't make an effort to understand, and above all, don't admit their ignorance. A conspiracy is a convenient, mirrored image and false representation of knowledge. It poses as knowledge to provide an alternative explanation for the factual situation. In other words, a conspiracy is ignorance masquerading as knowledge. For a conspiracy to emerge, people with practically no knowledge of a given topic need only gather and try to invent something. Those in power don't need to invent conspiracies and present them to us in the hope that we'll be distracted and won't notice what's wrong with the world around us. The most important thing for anyone in control of a group is to make sure that the people under them are afraid to make a change. When people suppress themselves and do not exercise their free will, they come up with mystical explanations for the feeling of wrongness that overwhelms them. Societies where people suppress their personal will and fear change are the largest producers of persistent, conspiratorial representations of the world. In medieval Russia, for example, serfs who were deprived of freedom did not simply feel that something was wrong. They knew that every minute of their lives and everything they could touch was owned by someone else. Their daily lives were endless lists of obligations from which they could not escape. The serfs understood that the only possible escape was inward, into an imaginary, metaphysical inner world of shadows and unreal ideas. This inner world was not formed to help them understand or change their unbearable and brutal reality. Rather, it was created as an alternative inner reality in which the soul could escape and take refuge while the body lived enslaved in the real physical world without freedom or personal choice. This is the mental environment of people without their own will and knowledge of the world, an endless conspiracy fueled by eternally confused, suffering and unhappy images for whom life is a fate without a happy ending. The important question for every person is whether they want to live without knowledge and without free will in a world they do not know and cannot change. However, a lack of freedom is not the only thing that leads to the creation of a world of conspiracies in which nothing is right. Personal freedom combined with complacency about one's abilities leads to a person's decline, resulting in a situation where nothing is right. A lazy mind convinced that things are fine as they are is the starting point for the spread of ignorance and conspiracies. For a human mind that has fallen into laziness, it is easier to see any change as a threat and the result of a conspiracy, rather than rational action. At a certain point, the easier option becomes the norm, and the norm becomes tradition. In our time, at least formally, there is free will, and people seemingly choose their own destiny. We see the world through the lens of our family and cultural environment. We absorb this environment along with its prejudices, fears, inherited knowledge, ignorance, and the prohibitions with which the previous generations grew up. Where is the key to things being right? It lies in understanding that every person and every generation has the right to make whatever changes they want. This often involves personal rebellion against the status quo or revolution. Disagreeing with the past, even when it is presented as a family or cultural value, is a personal right and part of one's path to making decisions and achieving freedom. Something is wrong is a dangerous feeling if it's not connected to a clear, concrete idea of what is wrong. Today, there is a high degree of personal freedom. Through technology, we can create virtual realities in which we can develop alternative personalities and live completely different lives. With billions of alternative personal worlds available to escape to, there is a real danger of losing control of the physical world. This would transform the feeling of something is wrong into nothing is right. While we speculate that something is wrong and come up with false conspiratorial explanations for what is happening while seeking personal pleasure in some virtual world, someone else is making decisions in the real world. When we return, we realize that it is not just something is wrong, but everything is wrong.